Welcome to this week's episode of O Ship Show, where we deep dive into the challenges and triumphs of finding that sweet spot in the market that every entrepreneur dreams of, product market fit. How do you align what you're passionate about building with what the market eagerly needs? Today, we're joined by Joe Meyer, a serial entrepreneur whose career is a testament to navigating those very waters with precision and success. Joe is not only the founder of ExecThread, but an ex-eBay GM, a 3X VC-backed founder, and a four-time board member with a track record of leading ventures of acquisitions by public companies. From steering ExecThread to becoming the world's leading aggregator of unpublished executive-level job opportunities to guiding HopStop into the arms of Apple, Joe's journey is filled with actionable insights on making the right moves at the right time. So if you've ever wondered what it takes to not only find your market fit, but to do so repeatedly across different industries and with ventures that consistently break new ground, then you should stay tuned as we uncover the strategies and mindset required to achieve this entrepreneurial holy grail. And God knows I know this is true because I've been trying to do it my whole career. And for that reason, I'm extremely thankful that we're guided by this chat today by no other than Joe Meyer himself. And with that, here we go with this week's O Ship. Joe, welcome to O Ship. Glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it, Freddie.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people don't realize this, but we both founded our respective companies, I think, almost at the same time. We were August 2015. When did you guys get going?
November 2015.
Awesome. I remember when you first kicked off and actually seeing the earliest versions of ExecThread. I think it was almost like primarily almost like an email group in the earliest versions. It's incredible to see what you guys have done with this thing, man. Respect.
Appreciate it. And yeah, in many ways, we're very much that same grassroots company from year one. And in many ways, we are very different. So,
look, today I'm going to get into a lot of different aspects of your background and various businesses you've been in. And I'd love to hear some of the stories from that. But let's just talk a little bit about the business you're in today that some people probably, when they think of you, you're very synonymous with. How did ExecThread come to be? And for those who maybe don't know, what is the business maybe today? And how did the genesis of this come to be?
yeah, so good question. As I mentioned before, we're founded in November of 2015, and in startup years, that's a lifetime. But for us, we still feel like we are still early stage, and I'm sure you could relate in many ways. So I was getting increasingly approached by executive recruiters, not only throughout my career as I was progressing in my career, but by virtue of myself being head of revenue and then CEO of two venture-backed companies that were acquired by AOL and Apple, respectively. And I wound up staying at those acquiring companies for anywhere from 1 to 3 years each. I was getting approached by executive recruiters pretty repeatedly. I had companies like eBay and AOL and Apple on my background, plus the startup experience. And I was never really interested in any of the opportunities that the recruiters were approaching me for. Not that they weren't exciting career advancing opportunities. It's just that they weren't really a good fit with where I wanted to take my career. And I thought to myself, this is pretty interesting because I'm actually more interested in the opportunities that they're not approaching me for, the ones that I can't find out about, where I could be more interested in those. And if I could get access to those hidden or confidential job opportunities, then I could self-select into them. And I thought to myself, I bet a lot of other professionals and executives have the same mindset, which is I'd like greater access to these confidential jobs. And then I thought to myself, I wonder if we could get access to these jobs, the confidential ones, by crowdsourcing them from the candidates that are getting approached. And in return for the proposition that if you contribute a job that you're getting approached for into the network, you could gain access to all the other jobs being contributed by all the other members. And that was the genesis. That was the light bulb. And I incubated it with around 50 executives in my extended network, not my immediate network, and started seeing jobs being shared, position descriptions being shared, JDs being shared. I started disseminating that information via email, as you mentioned, in a rudimentary newsletter. And open rates were phenomenal. Click-through rates were phenomenal. People in this network were getting interviews as a result of getting access to these jobs that they actually weren't approached for by the recruiter. Yeah. And then I thought, you know what? There's something here. And then within a few months of starting it, I started getting calls from the strategy or corp dev groups of large executive search firms. And here I was just doing it on my couch and mornings and nights. And I thought, wow, if I'm already on the radar screen of these big companies, that's a good sign.
It's a good sign. Well, one of the things
Yeah.
I think is so interesting about how you approach this is there's obviously a lot of technology that is part of ExecThread today, but you basically went and validated an idea when you didn't apply any real technology. By real, I'm not discrediting it, the email, but I'm saying it wasn't like you built a platform. It's I got to build this whole platform to go bring this idea out there. You kept it simple. And I love the expression like Wizard of Ozing technology. Like the tech was Joe Meyer basically pulling different jobs from different people and then reassembling it in a way that people found easy to digest. But is that, first off, is that fair to say, in at least for the first early months?
Yeah, Freddie, you bring up two good points there. One is ExecThread is heavily technology enabled in its current form. And I'm a tech entrepreneur and I believe in automation yet personalization. So we've personalized yet automated this platform from day one. That being said, in its incubated form, as you noted, it was very rudimentary. It was Joe Meyer with a Google spreadsheet and Gmail. And the origins of that is that when the light bulb moment went off for me, as I mentioned a minute or two ago, I approached one of my former engineers at OpStop, which was acquired by Apple, about potentially doing this with me and coding out the first kind of V1. And he said to me, "Hey, Joe, I might be interested in that, but I'm actually going to go start another company with someone else. And let me give you some advice, which is why don't you get to proof of concept without writing a line of code?" And I was like, how do I do that? So he gave me a challenge to take it to a low tech perspective just to get to proof of concept. And I went home that night and I said, I think I can get to proof of concept with literally the content, i.e., the job opportunities being shared with us via email, disseminating that out, the communication platform being email, Gmail, and the database, the tracking of it being Google Sheets. And that's what we did
I love it.
for the first couple of months to get to proof of concept. And then I had data points and proof points. And from that point onward, we started productizing it and tech enabling it.
This is, I think, sage-like advice for a lot of people, especially if you're a person that considers himself a very tech-savvy person or like an early adopter. I'm certainly one of these people. I'm obsessed with technology and innovation. And I think when you are wired that way, your first inclination is always to be like, I could do this thing, I could build this, and I get a dev to do that. And it's easy, tiger. Sometimes you don't have to throw crazy tech at everything to go out and validate an idea. And in fact, it's probably the best interest to not do that. Some of the technology I've been developing lately, joked with people that the original version of some of these search technologies we've been building for a company called Collective OS that we recently launched, I jokingly referred to our technology as Freddy 3000. And basically what that meant was you would Slack me and then I'd be like, you should talk to Tom or whatever it was. And then it was like we made sure that people actually wanted these things. And then we went out and actually built the tech to replace the founder behind the scenes thinking. How far along did you get in this before you really started to move to the tech? Were you self-funding that or did you raise money and then bring engineers in?
Yeah, so I self funded it probably for around a year. And I went low tech, i.e., no tech, probably for the first 4 to 6 months until the methodology that I used myself, Google Sheets, Gmail, and email, was busting at the seams. So I probably got to a few thousand members doing it that way. And then I hired a few developers to create the underlying platform, the plumbing, that would make it more scalable and trackable. And then we raised some money based on those proof points in year one and started hiring the team ever since. But I will say this, even though we started out very grassroots and very low tech, there's a tremendous amount of tech underneath the hood of ExecThread. Yet
Mhm.
we create the perception on the front end that it's still kind of mom and pop in some ways.
I think the magic is when people don't realize how much tech might be behind the scenes. I feel like with ExecThread, you were able to find that you felt like you had product market fit really early on, which is something to be super thankful for. But you also mentioned, or I mentioned in the introduction to the show, just how many people are now using ExecThread. So I'd love to understand what kind of strategies you were employing to effectively build out this community of over 750,000 plus business leaders you've now got on the platform.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Product market fit should not be mistaken for having the revenue model figured out. I'd say we did a product market fit early on in terms of identifying a need, identifying demand, and meeting that demand with a solution or supply to that demand. But as you might remember, early days of ExecThread, first 2 to 3 years, we didn't charge anyone for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal was to turn this into a talent acquisition platform that would eventually monetize via B2B. For various reasons, we abandoned that approach, mainly because it didn't work very well, to be quite honest. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't make the cash register ring the way we wanted it to. But because there was such product market fit on the core platform, the B2C value proposition for the applicant, for the professional, for the candidate, and because we saw such tremendous open rates and engagement rates and click-through rates and redemption rates, yet we weren't charging for any of it. Yet the model we had in place, as you might remember, was very frequent flyer-esque in the sense of the more you engaged with the platform, the more jobs you shared with
Mm-hmm.
us or people you referred to the platform, we awarded you with points. And with
Mm-hmm.
those points, you can then trade those points in or redeem them to unveil hidden information about these jobs, name of the hiring company, name of the hiring manager, name of the recruiters. And then we thought one day, you know what? That's a pretty good model for a subscription-based model, similar to media companies, where they give you access to the first paragraph or two of information, and then they present you with a subscription opportunity to get access to the rest of the information. And that's what we turned to. But it took us around 3 years to figure that out. So even though we had product market fit early on, from a user experience
Mm-hmm.
perspective, that led to very high engagement and demand. It took us a few years to figure out the revenue model. But yeah, to your earlier point, we have scaled to nearly 1 million members at this point, registered
Amazing.
members. We didn't throw bodies at problems. We didn't throw bodies at opportunities. We always took a tech-centric perspective and said,
Mm-hmm.
what can the computer, what can the code, what can the software do for us that do it more scalably than a human can? So we're servicing a community of nearly 1 million registered members at this point, with only around a half a dozen full-time employees and around a dozen and a half contractors, so around
Mm-hmm.
2 dozen of us all in. And it's incredibly scalable, yet personalized.
I love this kind of declaration, if you will. Just because you have product market fit doesn't mean you figured out how to monetize the thing. And I think people, you hear in entrepreneurial circles, in certainly if you're talking to investors and VC folks and things like that, you hear them going on and on about you've got to nail this product market fit. But nailing product market fit is obviously essential, but there can be a big gap between that and actually trying to figure out how to make it a viable business. What would you say is maybe the biggest thing you learned over this journey? You're like, nailed it. People love this thing. To like, holy hell, how do I make this a great business? It must have been a lot of experimentation that you had to test and learn to get to the right place. And it sounds like it wasn't necessarily that easy, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of things I can look back on that I attribute our, I guess you would call it turnaround to. Because again, even though we had a vibrant platform and community early on, which we still do, we didn't have much, if any, revenue coming in the door. So the first thing I attribute it to is the fundamentals of business, which is revenue has to exceed expenses and you have to earn a profit every month and you need cash flow. You can't rely on outside funding forever. And if your investors have disinterest in you after a point in time, or you can't raise outside capital, you better figure it out. Otherwise, you're going to go under. You're going to go out of business. And I had been part of a failed startup earlier in my career as a founder in my mid 20s, learned a tremendous amount from it. But I said to myself, I'm never going to go through that experience again. Figuring out how to generate revenue in a profitable way and not rely on outside funding is really something any entrepreneur, I think, needs to learn. Two is persistence and perseverance and putting yourself in uncomfortable positions. So, in other words, the way we monetize today, which is a couple of different ways, none of them I wanted to monetize in that way early on. I said, no, we're not going to charge the candidate. No, we're not going to charge for job listings. No, we're not going to put advertising on our site. Guess what? We do all three of them now, and we have a very healthy, successful, vibrant, profitable business. So you have to be flexible. You can't be too rigid, and you have to put yourself in uncomfortable positions. And you always have to
Mhm.
introduce new products and services to figure out what sticks against the wall and what doesn't. Last thing I would say is when our backs were up against the wall and we were having runway issues and we were not sure if we were coming or going in, I think, year three. One of my former co-founders from a previous business, the one that went under a couple in my 20s, said to me, "Hey, Joe, you have a great business. You have a great value prop here. I'm a member of it. You're solving a real problem and a pain point, but a frequent flyer program is not a company. It's not a business." And we were operating ExecThread like a frequent flyer program, like I mentioned before. He said, "You need to start charging people. Even though you don't want to, you need to start charging them. And I think your business is a perfect business for a subscription-based business. And here's how I would think about it if I were you." And hearing that objective outside voice was very helpful.
One of the things you mentioned in one of your examples was this kind of you saying, absolutely no, we're not going to do that. So, how do you get from this place where, as a founder, sometimes people won't challenge you and you can say, look, I believe this wholeheartedly as a founder. This is my baby. I know this is wrong for the business. And then getting to a place later down the road where you actually implemented those things. Was it advisors? Was it stubbornness on your part and slowly getting around to it and just having to see the data? How do you get from that point to this place where you're like, absolutely, we're going to do this thing that turned out to be, where the future of the business is?
Yeah, I think it was pretty black and white in some ways. Maybe not when I was going through it, but there was too much positive stuff going on for the company
Mm,
to fail, meaning
yeah.
people were joining the network, engaging with the network, getting value from the network, yet I wasn't seeing the revenue. And I thought to myself, how many times are we going to bang our heads against the wall trying something that doesn't work on the revenue side before we actually move towards something that has a better chance of working? For example, I can't tell you how many emails we received from members in those first 1 to 3 years where they wrote in and said, "Hey, we love what you're doing. And we think this whole point system is very clever, but I just want to buy the points. I just want to buy the access. I need the
Mhm.
access today. I don't have time to earn these points to get the information. Let me just pay for it." And we would receive those emails and say, "Yeah, yeah, but we're never going to charge the candidate or the applicant." And then when you look at your bank account and money's dwindling and you look at your payroll and there's only so much you can cut it, you're like, you know what? Either I continue to bang my head against the wall on something that doesn't work, or I try something that maybe it has a chance of working based on these
Yeah.
data points. Yeah, I think there was a bit of stubbornness on my part in the early days,
Mm,
but also that stubbornness also is what I think led to our ultimate success because I was
mm,
adamant that this was not going to fail.
mm. I love that. Perseverance is obviously a central trait. On this total tangent, behind you, you've got some really great subway signs and some parking signs. You showed me a bit of your office earlier and all the other great signs you've got on there. And I know those are a bit of a legacy from one of the prior businesses that you're known for. So I'd love to hear about if there are any parallels, or whether it was finding product market fit at Hopstop, or how that basically that journey may have come for you, and if does that look differently than maybe the journey to product market fit for ExecThread?
It's a great question. In many ways, Exec and Hopstop are very different businesses with very different value props. At the end of the day, they're both community based businesses. They're both businesses that solve a pain point. In some ways, they're both single point solutions, which is sometimes a very good thing, sometimes not a good thing, but for us, it's a very good thing. And in both ways, they're somewhat niche businesses, but there's a big difference between large niches and small niches. And I think both
Mhm.
ExecThread and HopStop are large niches. And I learned going back 2 startups ago that if you can play in a space and be the leader in that space, even if it's not the most massive market opportunity, but it's a large enough market opportunity, there is a lot of room for growth and expansion and innovation. And the same could be said for the pedestrian navigation business that Hopstop was in, multimodal transit routing, and the space that we're in, which is unveiling this hidden job market, which everyone knew existed, but no one really thought about how to unveil or open up. But the other thing I would say is the fundamentals of how we run ExecThread today are very similar to the fundamentals of how we ran Hopstop, which is, again, not reliant on outside capital, making sure that at the end of every month you have more revenue than expenses, making sure you have strong cash flow, making sure you control your own destiny, and being very tech enabled and very scalable. At Hopstop, we had tens of millions of users, and we never expanded beyond 15 people on that team. with most of them
Amazing.
engineers. And with ExecThread, around 1 million members with a very different value prop, obviously,
Hmm.
going to a few million here over the next year or two, with around the same number of employees. I think a lot of entrepreneurs equate how much money you raise and how big your team is as metrics of success. To me, those are the wrong metrics of success. It's like, how
Hmm.
big can you grow your business without
Yeah.
raising a lot of money?
Hmm.
And how big can you grow your business without having armies of people to enable it? Both Hopstop and ExecThread, while very different, are also very similar.
It's as you mentioned earlier, Hopstop ended up getting acquired by Apple, and I'm sure spending some time within that company, which obviously has its own kind of amazing legacy of building some great products, was probably pretty influential on you. I'd love to flip to the inverse of that. You mentioned that you also had a startup that unfortunately didn't make it. And I'd be intrigued to find out whether it was with that company or some of the other businesses that you've been involved with over the years. Is there an instance where maybe you failed to find product market fit, and how did you end up dealing with that, and what kind of big learnings did you take away from that?
The first company I co founded in my late 20s was a predecessor to Uber and Lyft. It was literally nearly the same exact business or
Wow.
operational model, but around 10 years prior to those companies starting. So a lot of this is timing, right? The
Hmm.
technology really wasn't where it needed to be when I started that Uber like entity before Uber did. So it was not only the right time, but I learned a valuable lesson when I did that, which was we were focused too much on vanity type stuff, building
Hmm.
out the team with great profiles and raising money and vaporware, but not actually building the plumbing and getting to
Hmm.
launch. And when the proverbial SHIT hits the fan, and if there's a market downturn and markets dry up and you can't raise any outside capital, what are you left with? You better have either a company that's already generating revenue and can stand on its own 2 feet, or you better have a platform that's tech enabled that you can springboard from. So I'd say that early failure in my career was a very valuable lesson, which is focus on getting to market, focus on
Hmm.
finding product market fit, as you said, and focus on how to figure out how to make the cash register ring all as soon as possible, because there are things outside of your control like market downturns and market slumps that will dry
Hmm.
up outside capital. And for those startups that are reliant upon raising more money to get to the next level or to survive, they're in trouble during certain times when they can't raise that money. And I never wanted to be in that position again. We needed to raise another round of capital at that early startup, which was called eRide, and we couldn't raise it because the market was dried up and there
Hmm.
was a downturn, and we didn't have enough to springboard from to stand on our own 2 feet. And that was a very valuable lesson. I'm glad I learned it at 28 instead of 53.
I love that you, and I respect you appreciating that, acknowledging that some of the metrics maybe you were thinking about for the businesses weren't the right one. Then I certainly have been guilty of doing that in different parts of my career, and I know I've spoken to people who might be listening right now who've made some of those similar mistakes. So thanks for acknowledging that. One of the other things you mentioned was just acknowledging what do you do when the market's maybe a little soft, and for people who may be listening or watching or ship right now who are maybe not entrepreneurs and not starting new business ventures or don't come from the technology space, but maybe are just in the job market. I'd be interested to hear if, as someone who's working within the industry of helping people find jobs or helping employers find people for those jobs, is there any just trends you're noticing that are changing the way that people are hiring today?
I think there's definitely much more embracement of technology in the HR tech and talent
Mm.
acquisition and recruiting space than there's ever been, obviously, with AI and GPT. In spite of that, it's ultimately finding the right job at the right time with the right company. In the same way for the hiring company, it's finding the right person at the right time for the right role.
Mm.
And a lot of that's human touch, I should say. And what we do
Mhm.
at ExecThread is acknowledge that, hey, we don't play in that part of the ecosystem slash, if you look at a search based process for, getting a key person in a role, we're all about the discovery phase, finding the job, discovering the job, that's the right fit for you, giving you access to job opportunities that you can't access or find on your own, and making it easy to search for that, filter for that, discover that job. But
Mhm.
ultimately, people need to talk to people in real time, in person, to figure out if it's the right fit. And we knew we didn't want to play in that space. We knew that is inherently a man-services business, and there are thousands of executive recruiting for that all day, every day, better
Mhm.
than we ever could. But we knew that wasn't inherently scalable to
Mhm.
play in that part of the ecosystem. We wanted to play in the making it easier for professionals to find job opportunities that are a good fit for them at this executive, and giving them access to opportunities that they can't find on their own,
Mhm.
and doing it in a platform like way. So knowing not only what industry you're going to be in, but also what part of that industry you want to play in versus what part you don't want to play in is very important as well. And we decided very
Mhm.
early on we weren't going to get into professional services. We weren't going to get into managed services, even though there were tremendous opportunities to do it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And there's a lot of money to be made in executive recruiting, right? In some ways, hard to resist those low hanging fruit
Yeah.
opportunities. But at the same time, we were guided by this principle that we weren't going to get into the professional services space. That said, professional services are needed in the world of executive recruiting because
Mhm.
ultimately you need to get to know the candidate, you need to get to know the employer, and you're not going to do that through AI or
Mhm.
GPT or ML. You're going to do that through face to face.
Yeah. This one bit, there's no technology is going to be replacing that anytime soon. I agree. This has been super interesting to be able to pick your brain, but it wouldn't be O Ship if I didn't inevitably ask you for an O Ship questions. For those of you who may be tuning into O Ship Show for the first time today, a big part of this show was built around this premise of talking to whether it's business leaders, entrepreneurs, founders, inspirational people who maybe have great stories to tell. And some people assume that their journey from point A to point B was a magical thing that just happened overnight for them. And I think many people don't get told the stories, especially through a lot of the media channels that we consume, that the path from point A to B is very rarely that. It's A to Z to X to 4 to Q, and then maybe back to B if you're lucky. So what I love to hear is from different founders, inspirational people that we have on the show to kind of say, look, is there a time in your career, whether that is just a great entrepreneurial story, a founder story, product market fit story, or frankly, the above, where maybe things just went off the rails for you a little bit. And I'd love to hear how you brought that back on track. And sometimes people share stories that are inspirational, sometimes they're very educational. Sometimes I'm not sure if they're any of those things, but they can be really bloody funny. I don't really care which direction you want to take it. I just love to hear any O ship story you're willing to share with us, Joe. And with that, the floor is yours again.
Yeah, I've had a couple of O ship moments, but I could think of two in particular, one at Hopstop, which was my last startup, and one at ExecThread. And both are very similar. They're both moments in time where something semi catastrophic happened to the business beyond our control that made me think to myself, wow, this might be the death of our company, or this is going to be potentially too big of a pothole to creep out of. So the first one was at Hopstop, where we were largely an ad supported platform monetizing eyeballs, and we outsourced our ad sales to a media sales company that would give us a revenue guarantee against all of our traffic. And for around 2 years, it was a beautiful thing. They were selling our ads, giving us checks every month based on our traffic that we were delivering. And we didn't need any ad sales people or ad ops people, yet we were monetizing in a way that was highly profitable. But then I got a phone call one day after not receiving those checks for around 2 to 3 months from that media sales firm. And the CEO of that firm said, "Hey, Joe, you might have noticed we haven't sent you a check for 2 or 3 months. It's because we're going under. We are failing, and we need to enter Chapter 11." And what that meant for me is 90+% of our revenue was lost overnight. So we went from
That's
this
amazing.
amazingly awesome deal, very profitable, month after month, revenue growing and getting more and more profitable, to wow, we just lost 90% of our revenue. That was an eye opener, and we figured out how to navigate out of that and around that, and ultimately steer the company to a very successful acquisition by Apple a year or two later. And then something similar happened with ExecThread in the sense of our primary member acquisition channel, marketing channel, which probably represented around 90% of our member acquisition growth. One day cut us off.
Oh my
I
God.
won't go into the details why, but
Mm.
90% of we were generating around 2,500 to 3,000 new members a day, and 90% of that
Wow.
was coming from one channel. And we got a message from them one day that they were going to cut us off. And that was another eye opener where I'm like, wow, do we have a business here if we don't have this one channel? Now, a year later, we are doing still quite well and found other
Mhm.
channels. And I'm a big believer that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger in the startup world and in life in general, to be quite honest. And resiliency is absolutely critical for founders to have because everything's
I'd say-
hard.
First off, thank you for sharing both of those. And one thing I noticed in both of them was a reliance on a single partner or a single revenue stream or whatever. Has that changed how you think about maybe certainly if having kind of redundancy in place or because I mean it's scary and it's in professional services, which is an industry I've obviously operated in for a very long time. So if you have one client who's 50+% of your revenue, they can destroy you overnight and wield an incredible amount of power and influence over the business, which is a scary place to be for an operator or anyone running a business. Any feelings on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I have two primary feelings. One is when you're living the good side of that and you found an amazing revenue channel that is crazy good, or you found a user acquisition channel that's crazy good, you're smart enough to be aware that you're reliant on them and you start trying to de-risk that by finding other channels or find other revenue channels or other marketing channels. But because you're benefiting so much from that one channel or that one partner, it's hard to prioritize the de-risking factors while you're on that gravy train. And it's not until you lose that partner and you go through that oh ship moment where
Hmm.
you're like, wow, now we really need to prioritize finding new channels. And sometimes you need that kind of eye opening moment to prioritize de risking and fragmentation in channel
Hmm.
development that you
Hmm.
need to. I guess sometimes it's hard to replicate the sense of urgency that you have upon an oh shit moment prior
Hmm.
to that oh shit moment happening.
I've always loved the
Um,
expression "sites 2020s." Yeah, it's
yeah,
it's hard to see it.
the other thing I would say is I think it's very analogous to the space we play in terms
Yeah.
of this. We're not an executive recruiting firm, but if you put yourself in the shoes of the applicant or the candidate, right? Like, how many times have you heard, Freddie, a executive who is 20 years into their career at a VP or C-suite level and killing it and doing really well, and then boom, their company reorgs and they're out of a job, and that professional never thought that could happen. And now they have to go find a new job from a standing still position. We all know they could have and should have been doing things while they were gainfully, actively, and happily employed to better control their destiny. But they
Hmm.
didn't. They kept on thinking that, you know what, this great job is never going to end. This
Hmm.
great work experience is never going to end. And it does, oftentimes outside of their control. It's very analogous to what professionals experience all day, every day, at one or more points in their career where they're presented with an oh shit moment themselves. And then they're like, oh, wow, I wish I would have done things to prevent that from happening or be in greater control when it does happen. But they don't. They don't do it until it
Mm.
happens. So I think it's human nature to some degree to wait for that oh shit moment to happen before you
Mm.
actually start doing what you need to do.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's fair.
to tie back to your question, yeah, there's definitely learnings there. And we have marketing channels in a much more spread out way now. We're not overly reliant on any one marketing channel, and we're not overly reliant on any one revenue channel.
I think that is a great kind of final lesson and a good place to jump off for today. I really appreciate being on our ship and just getting a chance to pick your brain with an audience today. if people want to learn more about you or about your company, what's the best way for people to go out there and research you and your businesses?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to contact me directly, just shoot me an email to joe@execthread.com, Joe at ExecThread.com, or go to execthread.com and experience the platform yourself.
Okay, awesome. I appreciate that. And it was very generous of you to share your email. So thank you so much. And again, to our audience, thank you for tuning in for this episode, whether it's your first episode or you've been listening to Oh Ship for a number of years now. We really appreciate you. The best thing you can do to support this show and continue to allow us to generate this kind of content is subscribe, engage, share videos, comment, send us questions and things or subjects that you think you'd like to hear more about, because this is something we do because we're very passionate about helping people to be inspired to work happier, build better businesses, and realize that they're not alone out there in this challenging world that we all live in. We'll never commercialize this show. It's just something that we do because we know it's great for the community, and all of your support makes that possible and gives us the energy to keep doing this week in and week out. Thank you. Thank you again. And Joe, just want to give you one more big thanks. I really appreciate you being here this week on Oh Ship.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Freddie.
No, my pleasure, mate. See you guys next week on Oh Ship. Bye.